Pull up a chair and dim the light. Leave your worries at the door tonight. No need to whisper, no need to hide. We're all chasing shadows side by side. Southern moon and candle flame. Every ghost has another name. Haunted halls and forgotten dreams. Nothing's ever quite what it seems. Old photographs and dusty frames. Everybody's got stories they can't explain. Somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, wonder waits for those who see. Did you hear it? Did you see? Tell me what you believe. Was it fate? Was it fear? Or something drawing you near? Curiosity after dark, where we wander through the strange. Every question leaves a mark. Nothing ever stays the same. Ghost stories under midnight skies. Old legends pass through lullabies. Take my hand and lose the fear. Wonder's always welcome here. Curiosity after dark, where restless hearts belong. Searching shadows for a spark, finding wonder in the unknown. Haunted mansions dressed in lace. Footsteps echo through empty space. Vampire myths and whispered lore. 100 secrets behind one door. Disney ghosts and phantom brides. Truth and fiction intertwined. The things we fear, the things we seek, have a funny way of making us believe. True crime headlines and unsolved names. The monsters hiding in familiar frames. The world is stranger than we know, and that's exactly why we go. Stories pass from friend to friend. Questions without easy ends. Somewhere between doubt and faith, we keep searching anyway. Tell me your stories, tell me your fears. Tell me the things you've carried for years. What's in the darkness? What have you seen? Tell me what keeps you wondering. Curiosity after dark, where we wander through the strange. Every question leaves a mark. Nothing ever stays the same. Ghost stories under midnight skies. Old legends pass through lullabies. Take my hand and lose the fear. Wonder's always welcome here. Curiosity after dark, where restless hearts belong. Searching shadows for a spark, finding wonder in the unknown. Maybe monsters wear familiar faces. Maybe angels leave no traces. Maybe every legend starts with someone asking, what if? Maybe myths and memories pass through generations quietly. Maybe truth is stranger still, waiting just beyond the hill. Maybe the things that keep us awake are the questions we were born to chase. Maybe wonder never dies, it just opens different eyes. So tell me what haunts you. Tell me what fascinates you. Tell me the stories you swore were true. Tell me what made you look twice. We'll talk about ghosts and graveyards, about creatures hidden in folklore, about the darkness in humanity and the beauty of not knowing. No judgment here, no need to convince anyone. You don't have to have the answers, just curiosity. Curiosity after dark, where we wander through the strange. Every question leaves a mark. Nothing ever stays the same. Ghost stories under midnight skies. The legends pass through lullabies. another story waiting to be told. Welcome to Curiosity After Dark.
Alrighty, hello everybody, and welcome back to Curiosity After Dark, where history, folklore, mystery, and the unexplained all meet in the same place. I am Lady Wanima, and tonight we're stepping inside one of the most recognizable buildings in the world. The White House is more than just an official residence of the President of the United States. For more than 2 centuries, it has witnessed moments that shape history. Wars have been planned within these walls, treaties have been signed, presidents have celebrated victories, mourned unimaginable losses, and made decisions that affected millions of people around the world. But a building doesn't just stand for more than 200 years without collecting stories. Some of these stories are well documented in history books. Others have been passed down through generations of White House staff, visiting dignitaries, presidents, first ladies, and overnight guests. Stories of unexplained footsteps in empty hallways, mysterious knocks at locked doors, figures seen standing in windows, and encounters with people who, according to history, should no longer be there. Now, before we begin, I want to make one thing clear. Tonight, we're separating documented history from legend. When we discuss the construction of the White House, the War of 1812, or the lives of the presidents who lived there, we're talking about events supported by historical records. When we move into the hauntings, we're exploring eyewitness accounts, traditions, and stories that have been shared for decades. Whether you believe they are genuine paranormal experiences, coincidences, or simply the power of history lingering in an old building, I'll leave that decision entirely up to you. So tonight, let's explore the history behind one of the world's most recognizable landmarks and the ghost stories that have made the White House one of America's most enduring paranormal legends. Turn down the lights, get comfortable, and let's open that front door. To understand the White House, we have to go back to the very beginning of the United States. When the American Revolution ended in 1783, the 13 colonies had won their independence from Great Britain. But winning a war and building a country are two different things. The new nation had no permanent capital, no long established government, and no official resident for its president. In fact, the federal government moved from city to city during its early years, meeting in places like New York City and Philadelphia while leaders debated where the nation's permanent seat of government should be. That debate came to an end in 1790 with what would become known as the Residence Act. The act authorized the creation of a new federal district along the Potomac River, one that would belong to no individual state. The idea was to create a neutral capital where the federal government could operate independently of state politics. President George Washington was given the responsibility of selecting the exact location for this new city, and he personally chose the site that would become Washington, D.C. Sorry about that. Now, I know what you are thinking. Like, we're celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence this weekend. And I, for one, am excited about that because knowing that, 250 years ago, we declared that we were being separated from Great Britain. That is amazing in itself. But considering that, again, at the time, we were just, roughing it for a while, it's kind of interesting how this was given to the first president to decide exactly where this place was going to be. So, it's interesting. So when he decided in 1789 that he was elected president at the time, we think that he lived in the White House, but he didn't. He just selected where it was going to be. All right. And also, he wasn't really thinking about a house. He inherited a much larger challenge. He had to help build an entire new government, and of course, that included where it needed to be. So, the land he selected was largely undeveloped land that was made up of forests, farmland, and marshes. It was difficult to imagine that this quiet stretch of countryside would one day become one of the most influential cities in the world. French military engineer Pierre Charles Lafont was chosen to design the new capital. His vision was ambitious. Instead of narrow, winding colonial streets, he planned wide avenues, grand public squares, and sweeping views that reflected the ideals of a confident new republic. Although Lafont was eventually dismissed after clashing with government officials and landowners, much of his original design still shapes Washington, D.C. today. Once the city was planned, attention turned to what would be its centerpiece, the president's house. Because that's what it was called at the time. Rather than simply appointing an architect, the government announced a public design competition in 1792. Anyone with the talent and vision to create the president's residence was invited to submit plans. The prize was $500, a considerable sum at the time, and a parcel of land within the new federal city. The winning design belonged to James Hoban, an Irish-born architect who had been trained in Dublin before immigrating to America. His proposal embraced the clean lines and symmetry of neoclassical architecture, drawing inspiration from the great homes and public buildings of Europe while avoiding the excessive grandeur of a royal palace. This distinction was intentional. The American people had just fought a revolution against a king. The last thing they wanted was their new president to appear to be another monarch. The residents needed to project dignity, stability, and authority, but it also needed to reflect the ideals of a republic. It had to be impressive without being extravagant, powerful without appearing imperial. Hoban's design struck the balance beautifully, and President Washington approved it. Construction officially began on October 13th, 1792, where the cornerstone was laid. No one standing there that day could have imagined what those walls would eventually witness. Over the next 2.5 centuries, the building would survive invasion, fire, civil war, assassination, economic collapse, world wars, terrorist threats, and some of the most consequential decisions in human history. But before any of that could begin, someone had to build it. When people picture the construction of the White House, they often imagine a handful of builders raising the walls of stone. The reality was far more complicated. Building what was then called the President's House was one of the largest construction projects the young United States ever attempted. There were no modern cranes, no power tools, and no heavy machinery. Every massive block of sandstone, every timber, every brick, and every decorative carving had to be quarried, shaped, transported, and then assembled almost entirely by hand. The stone used for the exterior came from the my bad, Aquatic Creek quarries in Virginia. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Nearly 40 miles south of the construction site. Workers cut enormous blocks of sandstone from the earth before loading them onto barges that floated up the Potomac River. Once the stone reached Washington, teams of laborers hauled the blocks to the building site, where skilled stonemasons carefully shaped each one to fit. The lumber came from nearby forests. Trees were felled by hand, cut into reasonable beams, and seasoned before becoming part of the home's floors, roof, and interior framing. Bricks were molded one at a time, fired in kennels. They were fired up and then laid by experienced bricklayers. Blacksmiths forged countless nails, hinges, locks, and tools. Carpenters crafted doors, windows, staircases, and furniture. you had all sorts of tradesmen. And this is what makes me feel so kind of emotional of listing all of these tradesmen and knowing that I'm one of those. Not particularly at this time, but having all these tradesmen help construct one of the most recognizable buildings in the world is just kind of amazing. All of these tradesmen spent years transforming what began as a construction site into a home worthy of the nation's highest office. But the story of who built the White House cannot be told without acknowledging another group of workers. Enslaved African Americans were an essential part of the workforce. Historical payroll records show that the federal government paid slave owners for the labor of the men they enslaved. Those men, so sorry, those men poured stone, cut timber, dug foundations, mixed mortar, molded bricks, transported materials, and performed much of the physically demanding labor that made the construction possible. Although historians cannot identify every individual by name, surviving records preserve the names of some of those who worked on the project, allowing us to recognize at least a few of the people whose contributions were overlooked for generations. Enslaved laborers did not work alone. They worked alongside free black laborers, European immigrants, particularly skilled craftsmen from Scotland and Ireland, and then American-born tradesmen. Together, these men brought different skills to the project, from fine stone carving to woodworking and ironwork. It is one of history's greatest contradictions. The home that would become the symbol of American democracy and the presidency was built in part through the forced labor of people who were denied the very freedoms the nation claimed as its foundation. For much of American history, that part of the story received very little attention. Today, historians and the White House Historical Association made a point of recognizing the contributions of enslaved workers, not to diminish the importance of the White House, but to tell its story more completely. Construction continued for nearly 8 years. Room by room, wall by wall, the president's house slowly took shape against the backdrop of a city that barely existed. Around it was muddy roads, scattered government buildings still under construction, dense forests, and open fields. Washington, D.C. was far from the bustling city we know today. By the autumn of 1800, the house was finally ready for its first residents. Well, mostly ready. The walls were standing, the roof was complete, but much of the inside was still unfinished. I have a terrible cough that just will not go away. Alright, on November 1st in 1800, President John Adams became the first president to move into the president's house. Accompanying him was his wife, First Lady Abigail Adams. I don't know why I said Williams. If you're picturing the elegant White House that appears on TV today, erase that image just for a moment. The Adams family did not move into a finished mansion. They moved into what was in many ways still a construction site. Only a handful of rooms were complete enough to live comfortably. Much of the interior remained unfinished. Workers continued their jobs around the house, and many of the decorative details we associate with the White House simply did not exist yet. Outside, the new capital city was little more than dirt roads and the scattered government buildings and open fields. Travelers often described Washington as isolated and muddy, especially after heavy rains. Abigail Adams quickly realized how impractical their new home could be. The East Room, which is now one of the grandest ceremonial rooms in the White House, wasn't furnished at all. Instead of hosting state dinners or official receptions, it served a far more ordinary purpose. It became the laundry room. Because the unfinished space offered high ceilings and good air circulation, Abigail strung up clotheslines across the room and hung the family laundry there to dry. Now imagine that for a moment. One of the most famous rooms in America now used for state ceremonies, concerts, bill signings, and presidential events, once held sheets, dresses, stockings, and towels swaying from ropes stretched across the room. It's one of those little details that reminds us that before the White House became a symbol, it was simply somebody's home. John Adams, meanwhile, understood the weight of what this building represented. Not long after he moved in, he wrote a prayer that would become one of the most quoted passages in White House history. He wrote, quote, "I pray heaven to bestow the best of blessings on this house, and all that shall hereafter inhabit it. May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof." End quote. It's a remarkably humble statement. Adams wasn't asking for wealth or military victories. He wasn't asking for his political party remain in power. Instead, he hoped that whoever occupied the house after him would govern with honesty and wisdom. More than a century later, President Franklin D. Roosevelt was so moved by those words that he had Adams's prayer carved into the mantel in the state dining room, where visitors can still see it today. For all its symbolism, however, the president's house was still very much a work in progress. Workers continued adding rooms, improving the grounds, and finishing the interior long after the Adams family had settled in. With each passing year, the house became more refined and the young nation became more confident. By the early 1800s, many Americans believed the country had finally found its footing. The revolution was over, the Constitution was working, the government had a permanent capital, the president had a home. It seemed as though the hardest years were behind them. They couldn't have known that in just less than 14 years, an enemy army would march into Washington and leave the president's house in flames. So by this time, the United States was still an experiment. The nation had survived a Revolutionary War, had adopted the Constitution, and established a new government, but it was still young and vulnerable. Across the Atlantic, Great Britain was locked in a war with France, and once again, the United States found itself caught in between a conflict between two global powers. British warships routinely stopped American merchant vessels, seized cargo, and perhaps most controversially, impressed American sailors into the Royal Navy. Impressment was essentially forced military service. Sailors were taken from American ships, sometimes claiming that they were British deserters, other times with little regard for whether or not they actually were, and were compelled to fight for Britain. At the same time, American leaders accused the British of supplying and encouraging the Native American nations resisting U.S. expansion on the Western frontier. Tensions grew with each passing year until on June 18, 1812, President James Madison signed a declaration of war against Great Britain. What would become known as the War of 1812 would last nearly 3 years. For much of that war, fighting took place along the Canadian border and at sea. Washington, D.C. seemed safely removed from the conflict. That assumption was proved wrong, very wrong. On August 24th, 1814, after defeating American forces at the Battle of Bladensburg, I think I pronounced that right. Often called the Bladensburg races, because so many American militia retreated in confusion, British troops marched directly into the nation's capital. For the first and only time in American history, a foreign army captured Washington, D.C. Government officials fled the city. President James Madison rode out to meet American forces before eventually retreating as it became clear the capital could not be defended.
Oh, you love me. Really? Thank you.
No, Prevail, you did not miss Supernatural Week. We are actually covering the White House for Supernatural Week. And you're the first person to enter the drawing for July. Congrats. You meant the show. What do you mean the show? Probably. Look, if you're missing Supernatural, you need to go watch Supernatural. But as for the Supernatural topic, we are covering the White House. Alright, where was I? Oh, yes. So, President James Madison rode out and then retreated when it became clear that the Capitol could not be defended. Oh no, if I was discussing Supernatural, that would literally take the entire month. Meanwhile, the first lady, Dolly Madison, remained at the president's house longer than many believed was safe. She had one final task. As British troops approached, Dolly refused to leave until one priceless possession had been saved, a full-length portrait of George Washington, painted by Gilbert Stuart. Contrary to popular legend, Dolly did not personally lift the massive painting from the wall. The portrait was securely fastened inside a heavy wooden frame, making that nearly impossible. Instead, servants and laborers broke the frame apart, carefully removed the canvas, rolled it up for protection, and then carried it away just as the British arrived. The portrait still hangs in the White House today. With the first family gone, British soldiers entered the president's house. Some accounts describe them eating a meal that had been prepared for President Madison before carrying furniture outside and piling it into the rooms. Then they set the building on fire. The flames quickly spread throughout the residence. The roof collapsed. Windows shattered from the intense heat. The elegant interiors painstakingly created over 2 decades were reduced to smoke, ash, and charred stone. The president's house was left a hollow shell. The Capitol building, the Treasury, and other government structures were also burned that night in one of the darkest moments in the nation's history. Now, there's a story many Americans have heard about what happened next. According to popular legend, the building was painted white after the fire to hide the black scorch marks left by the flames. It's a fascinating story, but it's not true. The sandstone exterior had been coated with a white, lime-based whitewash years before the fire. That protective coating helped shield the porous stone from weather damage and moisture. After the fire, workers certainly repaired and recoated the building, but they weren't inventing its famous white appearance. The White House had already been white. Even after the devastation, President James Madison refused to abandon the idea of rebuilding. James Hoban, the very architect that had designed the president's house more than 20 years earlier, returned to oversee its restoration. Rather than starting from scratch, crews repaired the surviving exterior walls and reconstructed the interior almost entirely from the ground up. The rebuilding took several years, and in 1817, President James Monroe became the first president to move back into the restored residence. The White House had survived, but some people would later wonder, did everything that was inside leap with the flames? After the White House was rebuilt, life slowly returned to normal. Presidents came and went, families moved in, unpacked their belongings, celebrated birthdays, welcomed children, hosted state dinners, and then after 4 or 8 years, packed everything up and left for the next family to begin the cycle again. It's easy to think of the White House as a museum or a government building, but for every president that has lived there, it has also been a home. Children have learned to walk within those halls, pets have wandered its hallways, so Christmases have been celebrated, weddings have been held, laughter echoed through its rooms. And like any home that has stood for more than 2 centuries, it has known tremendous sorrow. Since John Adams became the first resident in 1800, the White House has hosted dozens of first families, each bringing their own joys and hardships. Some presidents entered its doors during moments of national triumph. Others arrived while the country stood on the edge of collapse. Several presidents never lived long enough to leave the office alive. William Henry Harrison, the ninth president of the United States, died only 31 days after taking office in 1841, making his presidency the shortest in American history. Although he spent very little time in the White House, later ghost stories would claim his spirit never truly left the building. President Zachary Taylor died unexpectedly in 1850 after serving only 16 months. Perhaps the greatest tragedy, however, belongs to the Lincoln family. When Abraham Lincoln entered the White House in 1861, the United States was already beginning to tear itself apart. Southern states had declared their succession, and within weeks the Civil War would begin. The White House became more than a residence. It became a wartime headquarters. Military officers came and went at all hours of night and day. Messengers delivered casualty reports. Cabinet meetings focused on battlefields rather than domestic affairs. Each decision made inside these walls carried the weight of a nation fighting for its survival. As if the burden of leading a country through civil war wasn't enough, tragedy struck Lincoln's family personally. On February 20th, 1862, 11-year-old Willie Lincoln died inside the White House, most likely from typhoid fever. At the time, Washington's drinking water was often contaminated by sewage, making illnesses like typhoid heartbreakingly common. Willie's death devastated both of his parents. Those closest to President Lincoln said he openly wept for his son. Mary Todd Lincoln was so overwhelmed by grief that for a time she could scarcely bring herself to enter the room where Willie had died. The White House fell silent. The laughter of a child had disappeared from its walls and halls. For Mary Lincoln, the pain never truly faded. Desperate for comfort, she turned to spiritualism, a movement that had become increasingly popular during the mid-1800s. Spiritualists believed it was possible to communicate with the dead through seances and mediums. Historical records confirm that seances were held in the White House during the Lincoln administration, though historians continue to debate exactly how many took place and who attended them, and whether President Lincoln himself believed that they could truly contact the spirits of the departed. Whether Abraham Lincoln believed in spiritualism remains uncertain. What is certain that he loved his son deeply. Like any grieving father, he searched for ways to endure an unimaginable loss. After the Civil War ended, Lincoln himself would never sleep again in the White House. On April 14, 1865, just days after Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered at the courthouse, President Lincoln attended a performance at Ford's Theater. That evening, he was shot by John Wilkes Booth. Lincoln was carried across the street to Peterson's house, where he died the following morning. News of his assassination spread across the nation. The White House, already marked by years of war and personal grief, became a place forever linked with one of the darkest days in American history. In the decades that followed, visitors, staff members, foreign dignitaries, and even future presidents would claim that Abraham Lincoln never truly left. And strangely enough, they weren't the only ones people claimed to encounter. So up until this point, we've talked about documented history, the construction, the War of 1812, the Civil War, the death of Willie Lincoln, and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. All of these events are supported by historical records. Everything else that we're fixing to discuss is going to be different. The stories you're about to hear come from eyewitness accounts, personal memoirs, newspaper reports, interviews, and decades of White House tradition. None of these encounters can be scientifically verified, and many have been debated by historians. Whether they're genuine paranormal experiences, tricks of the mind, or simply legends passed from one generation to the next is something each of us has to decide for ourselves. With that being said, let's begin with the spirit almost everyone associates with the White House, Abraham Lincoln. If you ask historians, tour guides, and even former White House employees which ghost has been reported more than any other, the answer is always the 16th president, or almost always the 16th president. The first reports didn't begin immediately after his death. Instead, they appeared gradually over the decades as more people claimed to experience something they couldn't explain. One of the most frequently repeated stories comes from Grace Coolidge, the wife of President Calvin Coolidge. Grace later wrote that she looked into what is now known as the Yellow Oval Room and saw what she believed was Abraham Lincoln. According to her account, he was standing at the window with his hands clasped behind his back, quietly gazing across the Potomac River towards the battlefields of Virginia, a direction he often looked during the Civil War. She did not describe a frightening encounter. She simply believed she had seen the former president. Perhaps the most famous story belongs to Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands. During a visit to the White House in the 1940s, she was asleep when someone knocked on her bedroom door late at night. Thinking it was a member of the household staff, she got out of bed and opened the door. Standing there, according to the story, was Abraham Lincoln wearing his famous black suit and stovepipe hat. The Queen reportedly fainted. Whether every detail of that story is true has been debated over the years, but it remains one of the White House's most best-known ghost legends. And then there is a story involving British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Churchill had finished a long evening, taking a hot bath, and was relaxing in his room with nothing on except a cigar. As the story goes, he looked up to find Abraham Lincoln standing beside the fireplace. Churchill, never one to lose his composure, simply smiled and said, "Good evening, Mr. President. You seem to have me at a disadvantage." According to the legend, hey, lay down, baby. We're almost done. Lay down. According to the legend, Lincoln simply smiled before disappearing, and Churchill later requested a different room for the remainder of his stay. Whether that conversation happened exactly as it's been told is impossible to know. What makes these stories remarkable isn't that they're identical. It's that so many people, many of whom have very little reason to invent ghost stories, described encountering the exact same historical figure in the same building over many decades. Lincoln isn't always described as speaking. Most reports portray him as quiet, watching, walking the halls, standing near windows, or simply appearing a few brief moments before fading away. And if Lincoln was the only spirit connected to the White House, these stories might be easier to dismiss as folklore centered around one of America's most beloved presidents. But according to generations of residents and staff, he isn't alone. One of the earliest ghosts said to wander the White House belongs to Abigail Adams. Now, you may recall earlier in tonight's episode that Abigail often used the unfinished East Room to hang laundry because it was spacious and well ventilated. Years later, staff members began reporting an unusual sight. They claimed to see a woman wearing a cap and a shawl walking towards the East Room with her arms outstretched as though carrying a basket overflowing with freshly washed clothes. Some witnesses have reported smelling soap or damp linen before the figure vanished. It's one of the gentler stories connected to the White House. There's no terror, there's no violence, just the image of a first lady continuing one of the most ordinary household chores she performed more than 200 years ago. Yo, what's up, P-Money? It serves as a reminder that history isn't made up by just presidents. It's sometimes made up by people who quietly kept the household running. And sometimes those are the people whose stories refuse to fade. We're discussing the White House, my man. All right. So Abraham Lincoln might be the most famous spirit associated with the White House. But again, he's not the only one there. As we just discussed, Abigail Adams is also a ghost that is seen. All right. So over 2 centuries, presidents, first ladies, household staff, Secret Service agents, military aides, and overnight guests have shared stories of strange encounters. Some are well known, others are little more than whispers passed from one administration to the next. Let's explore some of those endearing legends. The first brings us back to one of the saddest moments in White House history. As we discussed earlier, Willie Lincoln died inside the White House in 1862 at just 11 years old. His death shattered the Lincoln family. In the years that followed, stories began to circulate that Willie had never truly left the home where he spent his final days. Several members of the White House staff claimed that they have seen what appeared to be a young boy moving through the hallways or standing quietly in doorways before disappearing. During the administration of President Ulysses S. Grant, stories spread that staff members...
Princess. Daddy here with your wicked word of...
Hello, Dingus. Stories spread that staff members believe that they have seen Willie near the rooms once occupied by the Lincoln family. Like so many White House ghost stories, these reports are impossible to verify, but they become part of the building's folklore and have remained there ever since. Another spirit frequently mentioned is President Andrew Jackson. Jackson was known during his lifetime for his fiery temper and larger-than-life personality. He earned the nickname Old Hickory because of his toughness and determination. According to White House legend, his presence is most often associated with what is known as the Queen's bedroom. Staff members and guests have reported hearing loud footsteps, unexplained laughter, and what some describe as angry muttering coming from an otherwise empty room. One of the earliest people to have reported these strange sounds was Mary Todd Lincoln herself. During her time in the White House, she allegedly believed Jackson's spirit still occupied the room. Whether the sounds had an ordinary explanation or something more mysterious, the stories have persisted for generations. And then there's Dolly Madison. Unlike other figures connected to the White House hauntings, Dolly isn't said to haunt the residence herself. Instead, legend places her in the White House gardens. During her years as First Lady, Dolly Madison took a special interest in developing what became the Rose Garden. Years later, when another administration reportedly considered redesigning or removing parts of the garden, workers claimed they encountered the unmistakable figure of Dolly Madison. According to the legend, the workers were so startled by what they experienced that plans were quietly abandoned. It's a story historians again cannot confirm, but it remains one of the White House's most beloved traditions. Perhaps the strangest legend belongs to a man named David Burns. If you've never heard that name, you're not alone. To be honest, I've never heard that name until I did this. Before Washington, D.C. existed, David Burns owned much of the land where the White House stands. When the federal government acquired the property for the new Capitol, Burns reluctantly sold his land. Decades later, White House employees began telling stories of hearing a disembodied voice calling out, "I'm Mr. Burns." No one could ever determine where the voice was coming from, whether it was an elaborate prank or an overactive imagination, or something unexplained, the tale has become one of the most unusual pieces of White House folklore. Even President William Henry Harrison, the president whose time in the office only lasted 31 days, is sometimes included in these stories. Although there are very few detailed accounts, the White House tradition holds that his spirit has been connected to unexplained noises in the attic. Again, there is no historical evidence proving these claims. They are simply part of a collection of stories that have grown around the building for the last 2 centuries. When you look at these accounts together, a pattern begins to emerge. Very few of the reported encounters are violent. There are no tales of entities chasing people through halls, no stories of possessions, no accounts of terrifying paranormal attacks. Instead, the White House legends are surprisingly quiet. A president standing thoughtfully at a window, a first lady carrying laundry, a child walking through the halls he once called home, footsteps echoing in an empty room, a familiar voice calling out from somewhere beyond sight. Whether these are genuine paranormal encounters or simply stories that shaped by immense history contained within those walls, one thing is for certain. For every administration that moves in, the stories are already waiting for them. For more than 2 centuries, the White House stood at the center of American history. It has welcomed every president since John Adams. It has survived invasion, fire, Reconstruction, the Civil War, the Great Depression, 2 world wars, a Cold War, and countless moments that not only changed the United States, but the world. Within the walls, declarations have been signed, wars have been debated, peace treaties have been celebrated, and history has unfolded one decision at a time. And it has something much more personal. It became a home. Children have taken their first steps across its floors, families have celebrated birthdays and holidays together, pets have roamed its hallways, parents have mourned the loss of children, presidents have carried the unimaginable weight of leading a nation while privately experiencing the same grief, fear, and uncertainty every family knows. That's why the ghost stories have endured for so long. Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, it's easy to understand why a place with so much history inspires legend. When a building has witnessed over 200 years of triumph and tragedy, our imaginations naturally begin to wonder if some part of history still lingers. Maybe the stories are simply folklore, passed from one generation to the next, because people like a good mystery. Maybe they're the result of old buildings settling, tired minds interpreting shadows, or memories growing from more colorful each time they're retold. Or maybe every now and then history leaves behind more than photographs and documents. The truth is, none of us can say for certain. What we do know is that the White House remains one of the most historically significant buildings in the world. Its walls have seen countless moments of incredible hope, heartbreaking loss, political triumph, national tragedy, and extraordinary resilience. And whether you see it as simply a home of the President of the United States or as a place where history itself refuses to be forgotten, its story is far from over. Thank y'all for joining me on tonight's episode of Curiosity After Dark. I hope you enjoyed this journey through history and the legends of the White House. If you did, let me know what you thought. And tell me, if you had a chance to spend the night in the White House, would you? As always, thank you for spending part of your evening with me. Stay curious, stay kind, and I'll see you next week. Let me see what my thing is for next week. Where did I put my thing? I'll eventually find it. Oh, thank you for the love, guys. What'd y'all think? Was this a good episode? I hope it was a good episode. See, I wanted something to go along, so every first Thursday of the month is a supernatural episode. And since the 4th of July is this weekend, I wanted to do something that was very much American and in the spirit of, America. White House. I mean, it's iconic, right? Like, some people, when they think of the 4th of July, I've been tuning in and out because it's Bing's birthday. It's his birthday? I need to go send him a message. Nice. Let me text him real quick. I'm gonna text him. Well, I'll be damned. Alright. Well, I can't find... You would spend... So you would spend a night in the White House? I mean, that checks out. I think you came in after I mentioned the construction. So that checks out. But either way, I will post what next week's topic is going to be. I just texted you, Flamingo. Happy birthday. Everybody in chat, tell Flamingo happy birthday. There is a lot of history there. Like, I was surprised. I knew a bunch of this stuff because of, like, in history and everything else, like, growing up and learning about this. So it's nice to know, like, and I knew for a fact, or not for a fact, but I knew that the most famous ghost of the White House was Abraham Lincoln, and that Winston Churchill encountered him. That's the most that I knew ghost-wise. And I also knew that Mary Todd Lincoln was into spiritualism. Oh, 100%. Facts. Flamingo is a reincarnation of all the ghouls. Hi, sweet girl. What you doing? He is. How old are you, Ming? You finally 20? He's 12? Okay. Oh, no, he's dead! No, that's even worse! No! No, that's even worse. Well, I think I'm gonna play some Marvel Rivals. What y'all finna do? Wait, y'all probably, like, you finna goof off? Man, you're probably finna play Sea of Thieves, aren't you? You're eating a burrito. It was bottle fed? Oh, God. I am off tomorrow, folks. So I'm fixing to game. I'm fixing to. You got some phone calls to make. I see. Okay, where are we hanging out at? We're hanging out in Crashes. All right, let me end this because I wanted this podcast to stay just a podcast, and then I'm going to restart my stream for Chaos. So y'all hang tight. If y'all don't come back, that is fine, but thank y'all for being with me during Curiosity After Dark. We're fixing to head into actual gaming. Because I got some water to drink, I got some drinks to make, and I've got some chaos to unleash. So, I love you guys, and I'll see y'all again in a few minutes. Okay, bye!